All right, everyone, welcome back to the Geospatial Index. We have a special guest, Mobeen Hanid. He's a GIS manager in the industry here in the UK.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
The format we've sort of gone for is that you interview me first and you've got a set of questions, and then I'll turn it around and I've got a set of questions for you. Yep. So yeah, looking forward to stepping through the items you've got to interrogate my interest and opinions in GIS.
Sweet. Yeah, I mean, we've got these questions, and they're very varied, I suppose, the ones that I've got for you and the ones that you've got for me. So it should be an interesting conversation. So I'll strap in for the first one. What got you inspired in the profession of GIS? Obviously, you've been in the industry for a few years now, but back when you were a young Will, what is it that got you hooked on the profession and the subject?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I can go all the way back to 2001, which is when I was doing year 12 at school. I think my maths teacher, because like in the final year of school, I guess the standard experience is, universities send out promotional materials, and maybe the government will try to entice students to do certain things. And back then, although it's kind of ongoing, there's sort of a resources boom. There's always some sort of natural resource that's in fashion in Australia that they're extracting from the ground and basically sending to China. And GIS was and still is a really important profession or discipline to help in the natural resource extraction industry. So I think a bunch of flyers were basically sent to our school about, GIS, and the maths teacher sort of waved one under my nose, and yeah, I kind of took an interest in it. I thought it was kind of, a bit technological, was kind of felt a bit cutting edge and interesting and new. And yeah, that's what got me interested then, really, as simple as that.
Just a simple leaflet.
Yeah, it's basically a letter drop. Yeah.
That's nice. Was it anything about the maths or something like that, or because it was a maths teacher that gave you this, or was it just unrelated? Were you a big geography fan?
If I'm honest, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to study. Again, just how the tertiary study selection process works, at least in Australia. You can put down up to 6 choices, and I literally put down 6 different degrees that I wanted to do. Everything, I think it was design in there, just GIS was in there. God, I can't remember what the others were. I think I might have put architecture. I think I put environmental science as well. I was keen on that. I put psychology too, and that was actually the first degree I ended up doing, because I was really interested in environmental science and conservation and human impact, on the planet and all of that. But I kind of convinced myself that psychology was actually more effective in combating our environmental footprint, because in the end, it's all about our behaviors. And I thought if I could somehow look at understanding conservation behavior, maybe the potential for impact would be greater.
Wow, that's an interesting perspective to take on it. I'm sure you just got yourself in a bit of a headache and loop from actually going through that, though.
Yeah, well, I never really actually ended up practicing psychology, and the reason was, I'm just not cut out for it. There's a hell of a lot of emotional turmoil that's involved in being a clinician. And you have to be incredibly good at separating yourself at the end of each day. And yeah, I started, it's recommended before you go on and do clinical studies, like at the master's level, you can't get anywhere unless you have a master's, that you go and work in the industry somehow with, as a social worker or in related work. And I did that for a year and essentially got burnt out. So yeah, that's when I went back to GIS, and that's led to this. Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that. Yeah, you definitely do have to remove yourself. I mean, it's just it's an intense job, it really is. But wow, I didn't know that. That's cool. That's really cool that you tried so many different things though as well. it kind of segues into it, but maybe you've already answered it. Like, what's your earliest memory of GIS? If it's not the maths teacher giving you the leaflet, maybe it may be even something earlier, maybe a map that you saw or something that you saw during your studies.
Yeah, so I do have an earlier memory that relates to mapping and spatial data and surveying. So there were definitely many limitations of the school that I went to, and unfortunately, it's a bit archaic, if I can put it that way. But one benefit of the approach that they took to education was that we had a lot of hands-on experience, and there's actually a sort of a standard surveying camp that every year 10 class does. And there was a relationship that the school had with Flinders University in South Australia, where the university basically would flag up an Aboriginal archaeological site in Australia. I think usually in South Australia, given that's where the school was, that was practical for a group of year 10s to survey with, old optical theodolites, not the new fancy total stations, and range finders and levels and all of that. So they take all of this old equipment to site in a bus along with 30 year 10s, and survey the site for I think a week. You'd be broken up into sort of groups of 3, I think, because you'd have to have someone with the theodolite, someone with the staff at the other end that you're wanting to survey and get the positions of, and someone I think as a scribe. And yeah, then you spend the rest of the term converting all of that data that all the different teams have collected into actual maps on like a A1 maybe size translucent sheet. So each team would convert its spatial data, the survey data they collected, into it'd be about a whole bunch of maps, and then you'd put the map from each team under your translucent sheet in the correct location and then trace it.
Right.
So in that way, we sort of collaboratively mapped these archaeological sites, and each year a new one would be created, and then the best map produced by one of the school kids would be sent to the archive for the university. So there was a genuine data collection aspect to it for the university, as far as I can recall.
Wow.
Anyways, yeah, that's what we
proper
did.
rudimentary way of collecting data and mapping as well, like real old school technology and kids in the desert sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right. Flies and sunscreen and sunburn and
Yeah.
all.
Oh, that's quite a nice early memory, to be fair, of GIS as well. It's a real practical one.
Yeah, although we were never taught about actual GIS and computer mapping. It was all very, very manual, and if that's also a characterization of the school too. So they're a bit anti-computers.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that is cool though. That's a nice actual early memory. I can't say I share a similar one. I mean, I was just looking at maps and just sort of thought they were cool. I never actually was involved in the sort of making of creation of actual data from a historical site. So that's really nice that you've got that. What's your favorite things about the geospatial community? I mean, how long would you say you've been in the geospatial community for firstly?
Yeah, so I finished my master's, and that was also something I had to work out because I didn't realize you could do professional masters that didn't have to be related to your undergrad. So when a professor at Flinders, because I thought I thought I'd have to do another bachelor's and start my whole academic thing again. So I actually did first year of GIS bachelor's, and then realized I could do a professional master's. So then I went off to Melbourne Uni and did that.
Oh wow.
So it was a very convoluted path. But so basically I started studying GIS 2008, then I did a master's 2009, 2010, and then my first job was at GHD in Brisbane in 2011. So professionally I did a summer job for a local council in Adelaide, South Australia, 2008, 2009. That's when I did actual GIS work for the first time. So
About 14 years ago.
yeah.
Wow.
And from all of that, my favorite thing, God, I mean, probably I've effectively used GIS as a passport.
Wow.
Like I've gone from Adelaide to Cambodia, to Brisbane. Like I've done GIS, and I could happily do GIS anywhere in Australia. It goes for any country really where someone's doing GIS. But I like the fact that anywhere basically that there's a government trying to figure out what to do with its resources,
Yeah.
or plan how the shape of a human settlement, GIS is involved. I love the fact that we can be seen as useful consultants, kind of anywhere in the planning of society, or the planning of the use of land, and everything else that happens after that. So it's maybe something I like is the fact that there's no real specializing. You're not stuck in any particular box. Geospatial is called upon in all of the ways that society functions, and I've kind of pushed that to an extreme by also sort of using my profession to find my way onto projects in 5 different countries now. So I like the fact that there's no issues whatsoever in having an international career in geospatial.
Yeah, that's very true. It can be used anywhere, I suppose, as long as you can get on with the people and speak the language a little bit.
Yes.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. So that's your favorite things, the sort of freedom that it gives you in a professional setting. But what are like maybe the least favorite things that you have about it? There's got to be some.
Oh man. I've had my fair share of traumas. That's for sure. In like like when my first taste of it, I guess there's a couple of directions I can take this question in. I can continue the theme of, I guess, the international experience. Like I was so idealistic when I had my first international experience, because I was a Engineers Without Borders volunteer, and you feel very special being picked to do that, and that has its risks as well, especially when you're going to a developing country and you can mistake yourself for being superior to some people there. So that's definitely something I didn't like about that aspect. Or it brought out, because I was naive and innocent, and young. I made some assumptions about what I was and what I had to offer, that I'd like to put down to over enthusiasm. But I guess these cultural differences and clashes of culture can bring out things about oneself that you regret are there. But those are also lead to important learning experiences too, and at a basic level come down to the fact that everyone's a human, and the basic things, like every culture, wherever you are, there are interesting, beautiful foods, amazing dances, amazing traditions, amazing writing, amazing poetry. At the risk of getting too cliched about all of this, but it's actually the simple fact that everyone's a human can actually sometimes be obscured and lost in all of these cultural exchanges. Unfortunately, sometimes the cultural exchanges can fail, and the consequences of that have been brutal. I have, especially when I was in the Middle East. Unfortunately, some people, depending on especially the degree of development of the country where they're from, can factor into, unfortunately, the degree to which they're humanized, which flows on to how seriously people take safety risks for their working circumstances, and often, unfortunately, those who are working at site in unconditioned in an unconditioned site in the Middle East versus the people who are working in air conditioning off-site in a nice office. Unfortunately, you will see very clear divisions based on the degree of development of the country from which they come from. So those, and straightforwardly, there is a stark difference in the rate of workplace injuries and death along the same lines that I'm drawing there. So that, whilst I have really appreciated the chance to go to many different countries, and I'm proud of the international career that I've had, subtly I feel a sense of shame and fear and trauma from some of the things that I have seen in my profession and engineering more broadly. And I feel the weight sometimes of responsibility of the West, you know, not to turn this into white man's burden or anything like that, but us coming from the West and our advanced countries, unfortunately, the results are not so advanced sometimes of our supposed role that we have to play on those projects. So I've turned that into a bit of a rant, but that's the other side of the international career that you can have. And in terms of basic things to do with geospatial that I'm not such a fan of, I mean, there's the standard things of, when are we all going to stop being victims of the CAD and GIS integration problem? When are we finally, as a profession, going to put that behind us? And I love the fact that some of our encounters, that's led to us having this conversation, have been around successfully resolving that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we've definitely done something good in our works. But yeah, that's amazing. Well, like, especially very brave of you to state that initial answer. Like, feel for you as well. I guess you've seen it firsthand where that sort of stuff is seen initially as like a huge solution, but the problematics of like what actually happens on the ground and how all these things pan out, and to get such a sort of I guess a blunter and strong experience isn't nice to take on. But like you say, you go through these things, you learn a lot, and it's nice to hear that you feel that, well, I definitely hear that you've grown from those sort of experiences, and they have helped shape you in the way that you approach your work now, I suppose, in a much more whole manner. So that's it's very brave and impressive from your side. But yeah, the other side of just simple things like CAD and GIS. I mean, one of my least favorite things is just a spreadsheet. Like, forever, these things are used not in the way they should be used. They're just data sets, and people use them for forms, etc., and merge all these cells, and it just makes everything else more complicated for us. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It just makes everything so much more complicated for us, and it's not used in the right way. I don't know how that happened. Someone must have promoted Excel spreadsheets as some sort of like do it all sort of program. People use it for forms and things, and it just shouldn't be used as a form. That's one of my strong opinions. But
and there's actually there can, at the risk of turning this every single statement of mine into some sort of dramatic, but actually there were mortal consequences for the limitations, not understanding the limitations of Excel during the COVID response in the UK, from what I understand. Because you know how there's only a certain, like, I don't know how many million records a given worksheet in Excel can contain, but apparently they were using Excel to record like the COVID infections or something, and someone was unaware that they'd reached the limit of the number of records in Excel, and I can't remember exactly what the details were, but that affected decision making because they misunderstood or had the incorrect count of the number of infections. So
yeah, I can totally believe that. I can totally believe that happened. Like, why is a single file being used to record this sort of information? Like, just stick it in a database. Why is it on like a Microsoft Office software? Like, it's just not what it's used for.
Actually, maybe that's actually my main gripe. The fact that our industry, our discipline still uses files at all, and that others from outside of our industry expect that we use files. As soon as you hear the word file, or that there's an expectation around the use of files rather than web services and databases, that changes my set of expectations for the encounter around JS. I'll put it that way, if I can put it politely.
It definitely limits like what you believe you can help produce for them, because you've got to go and use files, and it's a static data set, and it's likely to not be in the right format, and etc. etc. There's just going to be limitations. So yeah, and I agree with that one. It's definitely one of my least favorite things. So we can share that in common, I guess. But yeah, sort of moving on, like a bit linked to your first part of that question. Like, how do you see GIS changing, like the way we work in a sort of physical way, a virtual way, but also like in a cultural way?
Wow, that's a huge one. So I can talk about the most inspiring use of GIS that I ever saw in my life. And it's actually from an astronomer. And an output of his is my background image.
Yeah, I do like that image. It's cool. That. What is it showing exactly?
So
a lot. It's like all the sea traffic, the lights, the wind, the jet streams. It's epic.
Yeah, and you're exactly right that it is all of those things. So the guy is Felix Ferrand, and he started globia.org, so GLOBAIA.org. He is French Canadian, so from Montreal, and he is a genius. He is a genuine geospatial data artist. And back in 2011, when I was participating in doubling the size of a gas field, I was seconded from GHD to Fleur, one of the top 10 engineering consultancies. So basically, a significant proportion of the world's engineering talent had sort of descended on Brisbane around that time, because there was 3 methane compressor trains, or coal seam gas, basically compressor trains, that were being built on, I think, Bribie Island, or I think Bribie Island, one of those islands on this, just near Gladstone, basically, north of Brisbane, on the northeast coast of Australia. Anyway, so it was basically because there were all these coal seam gas fields that were being developed in that part of Australia. And there was a big competition between these different projects to be the first one to market, to grab as much of the demand for this gas from the likes of Japan and China. So I was on one of those projects. But basically the point of it is that it was extending the Anthropocene, which is basically this concept of the next geological epoch after the Holocene. And actually, it's only in the past couple of months that I think the Geological Commission, or whatever this global body is for determining these epochs, they actually settled on a location for that, for the evidence, the geological evidence for this new geological epoch. So what is it? It's basically a geological epoch centered around, or recognizing the footprint of humanity as being the dominant theme on this planet where these geological epochs apply. And basically they, I think, determined that it's around about 1950 that human activity reached a level where it was undeniable, and a dominant theme in the geological. I'm not a geologist myself, so I can't talk about the use all the correct terms.
Sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, so you can see a layer of plastics. Actually, one of the main ones was radioactive evidence from radioactive fallout from all of the testing. So it's pretty sobering stuff.
Yeah.
You know that aliens, when they finally discover Earth, and after we've wiped ourselves out, which is probably, unfortunately, what's going to happen. I don't know how many millions of years from now, but there will be this. The alien archaeologists and geologists will find this undeniable evidence of us there. So anyway, that was a long story. So basically, what this guy was producing around about 2011 was these amazing animations, global animations of a sphere rotating, of all the roads, all the pipelines, all the fiber optic cables, all the shipping lanes, all the flight paths, all the gas networks, pipeline networks, power line distribution, all the massive global networks of linear infrastructure that humans and transport infrastructure that humans have set up and collaborated on across borders. That's a funny thing about it. You can't see the evidence of borders. The only thing you can see evidence of is the coastlines. So effectively, all of these networks, if you just map them all without symbolizing them, or just have blank vanilla white lines, you can clearly see delineated the coasts, the interface between the sea and land masses. And things like North Korea stand out as well. Another one was night lights. Yeah. So North Korea is just this black patch. But pretty much you can see a perfect delineation of the land masses due to human activity. Anyway, so that's what this image is about, and all of his work. And I actually had a few chats with him by email back then. And I was the one that suggested to him that, because his visualizations had like a didn't have the globe as being transparent. It had like a faint remote sensing image, you know, so you could see the sea and the land masses. But I thought I sort of sold to him that it would be more effective visualization of humans' impact if the globe was transparent. You could see as it was rotating, both Australia on one side and in the background the US or Europe. Anyway, God, this is turning into a really long answer.
No, it's good. It's good.
So in terms of culturally, okay, so this to me is the pinnacle way that our discipline can assist in the transition of humans' understanding of themselves as now a force of nature. If we don't comprehend that we're a force of nature, then we'll fail to steward. Because we've become a force of nature, that means we have to become responsible stewards of ourselves and of nature, whether we like it or not. Either we give up all of the amazing knowledge and technology, science and technology that stems from that knowledge. We voluntarily become ignorant again, or we simply become responsible as a species. So this visualization and the other ones, like what Felix has produced through Globia, if you just Google "Welcome to the Anthropocene," and I can maybe somehow put it in the editing afterwards. You'll see a way that geospatial can contribute at the highest levels in this shift that is happening culturally towards becoming an adequate steward and a participant in the ecosystem that doesn't damage the life support system that has emerged, that we are lucky enough to find ourselves living in. And if we're not careful and are not adequate stewards, we will unfortunately damage and there will be catastrophic consequences. So
wow, heavy answer. But I suppose it's the only way you can answer that question. I mean, it's kind of talking about the sort of world culture and how GIS will effectively help to sort of shine the light to everyone and what's going on. I think in some respects I do certainly agree with that. yeah, it gets to that point where you can't be so ignorant to it anymore. It's I think it's like a natural thing, or like it just happens. Like you so much faced with so much evidence, and you just can't sort of look away towards the end. And yeah, I do definitely see a position for GIS helping shine a light on that. You know, maybe bring that time when you can't ignore it so much, bring it sooner, because obviously the sooner the better. So it's good to hear that you see it as a positive thing. I mean, of course, we would see it as a positive thing, but in such a sort of groundbreaking way.
Yeah, well, I can say actually that visualization had an impact on me individually, and to the extent that each individual defines the broader culture, that's an example of how geospatial affected me. So I actually ended up resigning from that gas field project, and I went off and volunteered in Cambodia, you know, because I didn't want my life to ultimately be this, what can I say, unreflective effort, just extending the Anthropocene. I'm as much of a red-blooded capitalist and an investor as the next person. You know, this Geospatial Index is all about that. But unquestioning encounters with the world should be avoided.
Yeah, great way to put it. I mean, it's just yeah, I mean, it's amazing that you quit your job from that, actually.
It's not the first, it wasn't the last time either. I quit my job in Kuwait because of those safety issues that I sort of flagged before. I've been better or worse, and sometimes it was worse. You know, the mental health impacts. You know, I've been to Qatar twice. It's never ended well because I've been uncompromising.
That's fair enough. I mean, you're stuck to your guns. You're true to yourself on these sort of things. It's probably the bottom line when it comes to work, especially what you work and what you're going to be doing.
And I think there's a message there too, that, you know, because I would consider myself as being successful. You know, I have a position of leadership in a I don't want to get into too much detail here, but
right.
I'm proud of the position that I have. And I think someone who's starting out in geospatial, they would see that what I've achieved is something that they would feel that they would be successful if they reach that point. So my message there is that I have the consequences for me standing up for what's right have not been catastrophic. No, and I have found the next opportunity.
Oh, I suppose positive spin on the end of that. Okay, so we'll try to move on. Although I would love to just delve into this conversation and just keep going, but we should try to move on.
Gotta get to you.
I know, right?
That's not just about me.
But okay, we'll try and maybe you'll do some whiz editing or something.
Yeah.
You can snap this right down to half an hour. But okay. So next question, like if you had 15 minutes with world leaders and that's all you get, like what would you choose to talk to them about? I have a feeling that it would be environmental stuff, etc., and things like this, things that we've already touched upon. But would it necessarily be GIS related, or would you try to be talking about something else to grab their attention? And what would you hope to gain from educating them?
Yeah, so I'm gonna share my screen. It would literally be just to play this video.
A bit of an Al Gore attempt there.
Yeah. Did you know that Al Gore was responsible for facilitating what ultimately became Google Earth?
Oh, no.
Yeah, like there was some policy that he had, like the US government wanted to produce Google Earth. I forget the details, but he was talking about it way back, I think in the 90s. The development of Google Earth and other systems is fascinating, actually. There's a lot of controversy. There was a group of German artists and programmers that made a precursor to Google Earth, actually. So anyways, you can see here. So I would just simply sit down and put an iPad in front of them and say, please look at this. And I'll say, you know, all of your decisions, and more importantly, the collaborations you have with other leaders, need to take into account this undeniable, indelible impact. Like, look at Australia there. Look at all of the roads. I'm just going to pause it.
Yeah.
You know, would you have thought that our road network, admittedly, a lot of those in the interior are dirt roads, but nevertheless, that's habitat fragmentation, all of that. You know.
So this is 1965. This is what this is showing.
So the graph, it's sort of combined. I think it's modern times that it's the current state of the transport network in Australia, but the graph that's going up is emissions, I think, or ozone. It's got all sorts of, I think it's essentially greenhouse gas concentrations or something like that. But basically, there's a great acceleration that happens in the 1950s. I don't know if you can see my mouse waving around. Yeah, and that all came because of the explosion of industrialization and manufacturing that happened after World War II. And also the baby boom and population and consumption and all of that. But you can't just look at that. You can't deny that, you know, humans. What chance do other species have, you know, in this context? And eventually you'll see the transparent effect. So you can see he's got the night lights as well, turned on. Wow. But like you can't deny it looking at this. You can't deny that we are the dominant species, and basically, you know, with all of our consumption involuntarily are steering the ecosystem.
I agree. I do agree with that. It's undeniable, but unfortunately, I think world leaders don't necessarily look at it and think. I don't know. There's something in their psychology that might not think that it's problematic. You know, they might look at this and say, "What an achievement."
Yeah, this is what I meant about the transparency. And that's the infrastructure that we have built.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So the Earth isn't there. It's just on a sphere.
Most of the stuff is outlined, isn't it?
Yeah. And the industry that we're from, engineering, is responsible for all of that. You know.
So, do you have what's your perspective on this? Is that what we've got here is too much, or that we need to really sort of regulate it to be greener, to be more safer for our planet, and I don't know, something like that? What's your sort of perspective on it?
My perspective is that it's a great tragedy that the Apollo program ended in the 1970s. Was it 1970s? And that what Elon Musk is doing, as much as other things are there's a lot of regrettable decisions that Elon Musk has made. But at least what he's managed to reinvigorate is our spirit of exploration. And I'm a huge fan of the concept of terraforming. I loved Kim Stanley Robinson's Red Mars or Mars series. We have to just get on with it. We have to get on to other planets and get on with, you know, this planetary stewardship is what we have to get good at as a species, right? We can't just be pottering around on this planet. So my view is that it's definitely tragic what you see in that animation. For example, the habitat fragmentation. All of those roads are scenes of constant roadkill. You know, it's horrific.
It's a destructive image.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's also a fantastic illustration of human achievement and the results of the Enlightenment, which led to the scientific, you know, a proper legitimate scientific method, which led to incredible technological progress, which has, you know, enabled us to become to stand astride the world. But it would be a tragedy if it ended there, and also if through a lack of what can I say, broad-mindedness and a sensitivity for what is best for humans to accomplish. If there's a lack of that awareness and true, what can I say? If there's a true, Well, it's difficult to get into this without getting spiritual. And then that's a whole minefield as well.
Yeah.
But God, like, because this then gets into the fact that it's not to our benefit to have all of these countries, but then that's then a huge minefield as well, because that can come across as insensitive and a colonial mindset. So the best way to look at it all is, in fact, it is good for us to progress to another planet, because if it is a fact that there will be another asteroid strike and we will all die. It's a fact. Simple probability. So in my mind, if I could have 15 minutes with world leaders, it would be to show them that animation to say, look at our achievements, but it can't just be this planet.
Fair. That's a very ambitious position to take, and it's fair enough. But maybe a lot of people would not actually be brave enough to say something like that, you know, and to believe that that's a viable solution. I think a lot of people look at the Musk terraforming and ideas like that more as a sort of science fiction, but it may be actually in scientific and sociological and species basis and conversations. It's probably an essential. This is probably an essential conversation to be start having, and definitely something to sort of talk about and think about.
Yeah,
Well, not even just think about, probably actually try to figure out ways to make these things happen.
to me, it's the ultimate activation of all of our disciplines: geospatial, geology, engineering design, ecology,
Yeah,
stakeholder engagement, the full
architecture,
works,
everything. Yeah, yeah,
architecture. That is the real game for all of our disciplines. Yeah, and we're kind of already actually doing terraforming on this planet, and maybe in ways that we didn't necessarily want to or intend to, especially in islands like the UK, where every inch is developed. That in fact is an expression of terraforming.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, that's very true. And it's funny how these things are right in plain sight, but people, like, you know, it's hard to connect the dots then, but that is, you're right, a prime example of terraforming. Like it's a landmass that is completely cultivated and like managed, and like it's in its own area where we are taking care of it and things like that, and every inch is accounted for. You can't walk around the UK and say like, well, what is this land? It's, oh, I don't know, we're just lost. No, no, something is, someone owns it, someone's doing something to it, someone has been here and managed it before us. So yeah, no, it's actually probably quite a sensible answer, but I think it comes across quite radical. But to be honest, in these sorts of conversation, and when climate things is a big like hot topic, like it probably shouldn't be seen as such a radical thing, considering what we've been able to achieve as a species on this planet. It's actually quite sensible, yeah. So that would be really bold, I think. And I'd love to be in the audience when you tell the world leaders for 15 minutes, that sort of stuff. Um, that would be cool. That would be cool. Oh, okay, so we'll go for the next question because we will just lose time. But I guess it would be around the similar topic here. So like, what do you see the potentials of GIS in 5, 10, 20 years, specifically in your industry? So wherever you're working in now and things like that, like if you're able to say that, if you're able to talk about that, like, you know, what is it? Where's the progression there? We talked about our sort of CAD, GIS, and Excel like troubles. Do you see there being sort of, do you see it being a long haul journey, or do you see there actually being quick progression? And possibly, do you see that a similar story happening in other industries, or will they have? I can imagine they would have different stories, actually, to be fair, but maybe you see it differently.
Yeah, I mean, so the headlines were 1962, Roger Tomlinson, the Canada Land Information System, was basically brought into being because an aerial survey and surveying company didn't have the capacity to produce geographic information and answer geographic questions promptly enough and cheaply enough, for Canada's land administration department or ministry or
Right.
whatever, for existing tools and disciplines at the time in the early 1960s. So essentially IBM, or the broader information systems discipline, was brought to bear on those geographic questions that ministry, I'll say, had at the time to properly administer and manage the land of Canada. So that was 1962. And that was all punch cards, but it was quite an amazing system. There's a really awesome documentary called Data for Decision that I really recommend everyone have a look at. And there's some nice histories of GIS in Directions Mag and also as blog posts, basically, even from Tomlinson himself, hosted by Esri, basically. Anyway, so I'm just giving that for context in terms of, if we're going to go into the future, we need to understand, the relatively recent past and how things started. Then 1993 was the birth of the internet in terms of GIS, and how that expressed itself was the Palo Alto Research Center map viewer from Xerox. Believe it or not, Xerox, of all things, that company, they were the first one to produce a WebGIS.
Yeah. Fun fact.
Yeah. And from what I can see from the Wayback Machine, it was live until November 2001. So basically, Xerox is in the Geospatial Index from 1993 to 2001.
That is cool.
Yeah. So that's GIS, strictly GIS. So an information system that happens to have or answer geographic questions.
Right.
That's how I think of a GIS. But geospatial more broadly, there's all sorts of things from, surveying to remote sensing to sensor networks, to well, there's all the scripting and coding.
Yeah.
And there's SQL, or there's the sort of discipline of spatial databases and indexing that goes into, and that's a whole subdiscipline itself. So in terms of, I hate to say it, but data science has to rate a mention. Artificial intelligence has to rate a mention. But I don't see the discipline going away. I'm going to say, and there's been fits and starts with this, but I'm going to say augmented reality has to be in there somewhere. And it has to almost, where it will be in 20 years is we will just be a layer on reality in whatever the augmented reality system is that Apple, Microsoft, and whatever
one of the
other
big dogs make.
Yeah, but more importantly, actually, God, Elon Musk keeps coming up. But what's his the brain chip startup that he has?
Oh yeah, I know. Is it called like Terramind or something like that?
They've forgotten. Anyway, but basically, there won't be any more devices there won't be any headsets. There'll be a chip in 20 years, and you'll have, like, depending on how Neuralink, that's the one. So Neuralink and the ecosystem around that, there'll be Microsoft, the Microsoft of Neuralink, or whatever Neuralink becomes. So we will basically just have there'll be an our brains will literally have antennas embedded in them, and we will have an overlay. There'll be something in the optic nerve that somehow they'll figure out how to, well, okay, it all feeds back. That's irrelevant. It's in the occipital lobe at the back of your brain that the optic nerve ultimately connects with. So where it all happens, presumably, I don't know how, I forget, despite studying psychology, but there'll be some sort of system that functions as an overlay on reality, that rotates as you rotate your head and move your eyes, and you will simply, by thinking about it and by whatever tier you have paid for in your monthly subscription to this reality overlay, this spatial reality overlay, you will be able to see, as a consumer or a professional, depending on the package you have subscribed to, a certain level of detail of data overlaid.
Wow.
That's
So
my
I suppose
expectation.
that's 20 years, or
Yeah.
just in the future of GIS and how it will encompass all the disciplines and where it'll eventually end up as a product.
I have to say definitely in 20 years, because something this week that I saw in the news was a Pink Floyd track that they were able to recreate just by a brain
Sort of like
sensing brainwaves.
memorying it and sort of something like that.
Well,
Right.
I don't know if it was someone listening to Pink Floyd and simultaneously they detected the brainwaves of the person listening and were able to, just from the detection of the amplitude of those brainwaves, were able to recreate in a convincing way that Pink Floyd track. So we're pretty advanced
Yeah.
in terms of the reading. In terms of the writing, obviously that's next, and that's where all the money is, I assume, because then you'll have subscription services where people will have a brain implant. So I expect that, and they'll
Wow.
be at Geospatial. Yeah.
I mean, this is what podcasts are all about. They're about big conversations. But it's yeah. You I think you are spot on. And like in terms of technological advancements, especially in the day and age that we're in now, 20 years is a long time, and a lot can happen in that time. And I think it seems far-fetched to chat about these things, I think, for an average listener, or maybe just for, I don't know, but it's it it seems far-fetched, but it really isn't. It really isn't, because this is where everything is going. This is what a lot all the like main companies, the big companies like Google and like people like Elon Musk and personalities like that, they are going for this sort of stuff, and that is what is shaping society and civilization. So yes, it will all sort of come to this one thing as well, I suppose, our sort of geospatial industries, because that is, you're right, when you're looking through this lens of this Neuralink, you need to have some sort of spatial context to it, because otherwise you will just have buildings being built on clouds and skies and things like that. You need to
Yeah.
have a base, an understanding of where these things are sitting. So, I mean, that's what's the sort of human interaction to that then? Because would AI be building these technologies? So would we even have the job of putting the spatial
Oh my
index into
God.
those sort of things?
That I'm just immediately thinking, like, you could have like an AI embedded in people's brains, and then people wouldn't, you'd lose the distinction between your own thoughts and the AI's thoughts, and you'd have
Yeah,
like mass broadcasts of the whole of humanity's, you know what I mean, from like
yeah,
central AI. But another thing, there's another integration, and I really hate getting into it, but it's inevitable, I guess. Another system from Elon Musk is Starlink, and so that is the the globe's most persistent radio transmission system for broadband internet. So presumably that could be linked up to something like Neuralink. So then you've got a global system that's persistent no matter where you are on the planet, that gives you access to every other human that has a Neuralink chip or whatever other, insert generic radio transmitter chip that also has um, that gives you that's a direct interface for the brain into some broader distributed um, spatial computer system or spatial database, I'll just say, um, to provide reference layers for insight into whatever your eyes are looking at. Anyway.
how much did this sort of stuff detach us from the reality and the real world, especially if it's basically based upon your thoughts? You can just start building a mansion. You're living in a shed, but you build a mansion and that's what you see. So
Absolutely.
it's I
The
guess we
Matrix. This is the
yes,
Matrix.
yeah, exactly. But it's a matrix that we're very aware of, so it may not take as easy. I guess we do have to see these things in practice to understand how humans and how we will like sort of experience it and how we'll take it on. But I mean, when I start to hear that sort of stuff, like I just know that there is going to be it's just going to split. It's just going to split people in half, and it's going to be
absolutely.
so hard to get an understanding.
Yeah, the psychological consequences, the potential for mass hysteria, the potential to literally destroy people's minds and lives and emotions is huge. Yep.
Yeah.
Massive ethical concerns.
Yeah, I mean that could just accelerate the
Absolutely.
Armageddon sort of thing. So
yeah, definitely.
But we're on that path. We are clearly on that path. So I feel like there is some form of hope, but yes, it's GIS. This is what we talk about. Amazing. So let's wrap up on your last question, then we can switch over. But it's a personal one. So if you were not in the GIS industry, I mean, we've talked about you carrying out a psychological degree initially, but what else would you have liked to have gone into? What do you think you would have gone into? Maybe even from what you know now, would be a good position, because when you're younger it's difficult. But yeah, from your perspective now, if GIS was wiped off, where would you be looking to go into?
Oh, that's a huge one. And of course, inevitably, anybody who's asked that question is filled with the regret of the decisions they didn't make.
Oh yeah, it's tough, isn't it?
So what I didn't have when I was a youngster trying to make a decision was insight, and I had a huge amount of ego, as a lot of young men do, and that led to me to ignore what I was really suited to. So with the benefit of insight and more exposure to the world and how it works, and this also maps onto the limitations of the education system. I was kindergarten to year 12, really, in this alternative education system, which, as I said, had some benefits. For example, I learned how to manually survey a site
yeah,
and manually produce a map. But I wasn't sufficiently exposed to numeracy. There's a big emphasis on literacy. Nobody talks about numeracy apart from our new Prime Minister in the UK. Thankfully, he's got his own limitations, of course, but one thing he has been messaging on, which I like, is the fact that we need more numeracy in schools. Another limitation of the decision, the basis for my decision initially, was a lack of an appreciation of actually our capitalist system, especially the small time capitalism. There's actually a lot to be said for, and there's a lot of inspiration that can be taken from your regular, mum and dad running a convenience store, or you're a young person, who has the time and patience to sit down and properly listen to people's problems, and discover patterns in that listening, and rank those problems and start to think about a solution after they've fully understood the top problems people face.
right.
And there's all power to that person who makes a fortune because they've been humble enough to sit down and listen to enough people and discover a big enough problem for enough people. Right. So I essentially came out of school as a communist, and with a huge amount of suspicion about regular mainstream life and having a career at all and everything. But what I've come to understand from studying investing, in 2019, I did a short course on how to be a value investor. And that's then given me a new perspective on our industry, and has led to the Geospatial Index and 194 companies, I think, that we're up to on 29 exchanges around the world. And an industry, by my calculations, tracking all of those in the past 10 years, it's growing something like 15% per year. So if I could have my time again, or if I was to look at the world without GIS, it's a toss-up between personal finance, especially focusing on investment management, but more about advocacy and awareness, so that regular folk in a risk-controlled way have productive encounters with equities and investing. There's a lot of potential there for people not to get burnt. So, but there's also, I've been studying product management. That's the latest course I'm doing. And I'd have to say actually that I would go for spending time like 6 months to do significant in-depth research about significant problems that large numbers of people have in a discipline that I'm familiar with, for example, geospatial, so that I can begin to assemble a case for investment in coming up with a product or service that people would be willing to pay for to solve those problems. So entrepreneurship would be number one. Number two would be equities analysis and running a fund. Yeah, for example, turning the Geospatial Index into an exchange traded fund.
Wow, that is an amazing journey you went through. I mean, to me, you've never come across as an arrogant fella, so you clearly experienced some major ego death. But I don't think, yeah, I don't think you're an anomaly when you leave university and you're a communist. So that's yeah, it's impressive. But
I'm at school.
Okay, even school, yeah.
But also kind of university too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's pretty common, I think, in that sort of you've not really had your experience of real life at that age as well. So like it's those ideas and things are very appealing.
Yeah.
But amazing. That is amazing, and your answer even more profoundly incredible. Like you would take everything that you have experienced and learned and bang, go for it. You know, really take on like how the world works and put it into the path of what you're like passionate about to really build something that would effectively solve people's problems, which is an incredible answer to a question like that, you know. So hats off. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Mobeen.
No worries.
I'm slightly embarrassed to have been interviewed and have the focus on me, but yeah, I also actually appreciate the chance to talk about some of the ideas and experiences in this career that have been meaningful to me. And yeah, what small examples I can say I hope that I can offer some support. Maybe that my story can offer some support to, especially on the ethical side, and the fact that I haven't really experienced any terrible consequences for standing up for what's right. I just wanted to emphasize that for people. Yeah.
Yeah, well, truth will always come out, I suppose, isn't it? It's a
Anyway.
good. It's a nice closing point as well, if that is your closing point.
I feel like that's a bit pessimistic, though.
There's hints of pessimism, but I don't think it's I don't think it's I don't think it's anything wrong with it, to be honest.
Yeah, maybe it's just an honest account as well.
Yeah. It's your career, it's what you've gone through. So I think from the stories that you did tell, it'd be hard to not have a sort of pessimistic angle on the certain things that you've experienced and seen, especially being in industries like gas and working out in the Middle East, being someone who you are, going there, like you say, in an office with the workers, etc. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's anything the matter with it. I'd say it's pretty honest.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm looking forward to my set of questions now.
Yeah.
For you.